May 21 is the day of judgment. It is a terrible day of destruction all over the world.
I grew up with family radio because Mr. Camping is my father.
Okay. I signed my life away.
He was telling me how he had come to think that the end of the world was coming in 2011, and so I was listening to that, and I was studying it myself and thinking about it. And that was really a strong enough feeling for me that that was one of the reasons I wanted to come work here. Maybe a year ago, I was thinking, what if I'm wrong? Or what if we haven't figured this out right? Then what will happen? You know, I was kind of waffling back and forth because I wasn't sure. And I wanted to be sure because it's so important. And I took it very seriously. Like, this is something that I really need to know. Once I came to the belief that the world really is going to end, it was very overwhelming for me personally. It was very overwhelming. I began not sleeping at night because all I could think about was, what can I do in my life between now and then? And am I ready to meet God? What if the world's going to end and I'm not ready? Or what about my children? What about my grandchildren? I have grandchildren that are babies. What about them? It affected my relationship with my children. Just because I believed the world was going to end doesn't mean that they believe the world was going to end. And when you're 18 or 20 years old, that's not what you want to hear. I've come to the point now where I never think, what if? I look at that calendar constantly, and I look at that as being the last day I will be on this earth.
Over many years, Harold Camping and fellow believers constructed an intricate scheme, a puzzle in which all the pieces fit. At its heart was a biblical calendar of the history and destiny of mankind. Key events in the calendar were linked by numbers with spiritual meaning that told a story about salvation. For the believers, overwhelming evidence pointed to 2011 as the year of the end, and to May 21 as the exact date.
From the date that Christ was hanging on the cross, we know that with great accuracy, to May 21 is exactly 722,500 days inclusive. And when we break it breaks down into two time patterns, identical time patterns, that identify exactly with what the gospel is. Because it breaks down into time, that's the atonement, Christ demonstrating on the cross, times 10, that's the completeness of whatever's in view, the completeness of God's salvation plan. 17 is describing salvation for all of God's people, because our salvation is completed when we receive our glorified spiritual bodies, and that will be on May 21. Right. And then it's doubled, right, showing that it's established and it's shortly going to come to pass.
Surely come to pass.
Boy, when I saw that, I thought, there's no way that it can't happen. There's no way.
Harold himself predicted Judgment Day before, but for believers, that prediction was different.
September 6th of 1994 will be the last day of the final tribulation period. First, second, third, fourth, fifth.
Even if the world doesn't end, Camping's cheerful about the future.
So you keep going if it doesn't happen. You just keep on trucking.
I just won't retire.
Right.
I'm planning to retire in September, but if it doesn't happen, I can't retire. I got to keep working.
It's almost funny now, but not really. But I kept my kids out of school that day because I thought, what if he's right? If the world's going to end today, I want my kids here at home, not at school. I still remember sitting in the living room with my children. And so we sat in the living room, looking out the window. We had no idea, but that's what we knew back then. There was so much we didn't understand yet. And then, of course, it didn't happen. And then my daughter said, Mom, you ruined my perfect attendance record. I said, yes, but it seemed like such an important reason. As time went by, everything started falling into place. The verses that didn't make sense to me before made total sense. things that seemed contradictory because we didn't understand it right, now everything fits. And so it finally came to the point where when he was teaching about 2011, and I looked at all we've learned in the last 5 or 10 years, and I said, oh, this is so different from 1994.
Good evening, I'm Cynthia McFadden. We begin tonight with the end of the world. Right now, thousands of people across America are literally preparing to meet their maker before the sun sets tomorrow.
So here you are. You're a believer that the world is going to come to an end on May 21st, and you're sitting with other believers waiting for the world to end. The clock is ticking and the hours are creeping by, perhaps, and the world isn't ending.
So every time I talk to people who knew how to break down that timeline, they confirm the accuracy of his timeline.
As the world fails to end, you are beginning to feel more and more agitated. Is this going to happen or is this not going to happen?
So, I mean, that's the question I had. If that had happened...
a call from a tsunami or an earthquake or a destruction.
Right, who would be there to report that it was...
Now, typically, as the anxiety rises between I'm waiting for the world to end and it isn't ending, the dissonance will start to feel more and more acute. Dissonance, you understand, is as uncomfortable as hunger and thirst. It's a motivational state. We may not know that that's the term for it, but it's that feeling in your gut that something is not right here. And so as that anxiety builds for people, as they see the prophecy is not going to pan out, they will then have to find some way to reduce that anxiety.
We're just learning that we have to be looking at all of this a little bit more spiritual, but it won't be spiritual on October 21 because the Bible clearly teaches that then the world is going to be destroyed altogether.
What advice do you give those followers who did take you literally and spent everything they had and are worried about how they're going to survive between now and October 21st? Some people did give up their homes, but what is the advice to them?
People cope.
Just to cope?
If people want me to apologize, I can apologize, yes. It was to be understood spiritually.
Can we interview you after October 21st?
May you? If I would stand here, of course you could. But I'm not going to be here after October 21st. Okay?
What dissonance means is, we who see ourselves as good, kind, competent people, if we are now confronted with evidence that we just did something that was unkind, hurtful, foolish, incompetent, or wrong, we have a choice. We can say, I'd better revise my view of myself, or we dismiss the evidence.
It's been challenging, and I think it's going to keep being challenging. That date had always been there as the end. That had always been there. So I'm not going to say now, well, we had that wrong, so probably that's wrong, and probably that's wrong. You know, that would just be foolish. But I'm not focusing on it at all.
All of us have some belief that really we should let go of because there's no longer any evidence to support it. The choice is often one that requires integrity and courage and guts. That's why it is difficult for people to say, I was wrong. The greatest problem we have is not from bad people who do bad things. It's from good people who justify the bad things they do to preserve their belief that they're good people.
We don't cope well with feeling wrong, with dissonance. Our natural reaction is to get away from it, to get ourselves back to a state of feeling right. But in our desire to be right, we are at risk of turning our beliefs into certainties and mistaking them for the truth.
We have understood correctly, very correctly.
If Harold Camping and his fellow believers show us one thing, it is that the feeling of truth inside us is no indication of how right we really are.